What if every UFC champion decided to take their next fight at the division directly above them? What if they decided to leave their natural weight class and, to the best of their ability, dedicate themselves to becoming a mainstay in the division above their own? For this video, we're not going to chart it out fight to fight in a narrative sense, but instead it'll be a look at the division above, the matchups for the champion in question, and where I feel they would roughly fit in terms of ranking. So let's just get into it. Women's strawweight. If there has been one major constant throughout this recent run in Weili Zhang's career, it's that her physicality is becoming a huge problem for these other strawweights. Zhang is technical, yes, but this ongoing stretch of form is showing her to be the most physically dominant force we've ever seen at 115 pounds. And looking above at Flyweight, which in my opinion is not as good a division, it would stand to reason that someone with Zhang's attributes would do quite well there. Well, I certainly think so anyways. But in matchups like Erin Blanchfield, Taila Santos, and of course Valentina Shevchenko, I can see issues for Weili. These are fights that she can win, sure, but if I had to guess, if Weili took on every member of the top 5 and the champion Alexa Grasso, she might falter in 2 or maybe even 3 of those fights, so I would place her comfortably in the top 3 or 4. Women's flyweight. Alexa Grasso surprised quite a lot of people when she managed to find a real run of form in the 125-pound division, and even more fans were shocked when she ousted the long-time divisional queen, Valentina Shevchenko, at UFC 285. Grasso is good and getting closer to achieving the early potential that some had pegged for her early on, and I do think that Bantamweight is a struggling division, maybe the single weakest in the UFC right now. So yeah, Alexa Grasso would be comfortable in there, in her modern form, but I still don't think that she would have the skills to pull away from the competition, and perhaps even more so than Weili Zhang, she would probably win half and lose half against that upper tier. It's a division that really needs an injection of undeniable talent, and I'm not fully convinced that Alexa Grasso would be so far ahead of the pack to be that. Women's bantamweight, and finally on the women's side of things, we don't have a bantamweight champion right now, or a division above it to really get a read on, so let's just move on. Flyweight. Alexandre Pantoja managed to announce his arrival to the big time on the global stage, taking Brandon Moreno's flyweight title in an instant classic. And in that bout, he showed us why the experts had been pegging him as one of the division's most underrated talents for years now. But how would Pantoja's grit, his well-roundedness, and his all-time high confidence serve him in one of the best, if not the best, division in the sport? Well, I do think a jump up to bantamweight would be tough for a guy like him. At 5'5", he is a pretty normal-sized flyweight, but there is a physicality jump at bantamweight, and I just wouldn't pick him in the vast majority of top 10 clashes. Even at 11 or 12, Umar Nurmagomedov and Ricky Simone, they're tough nights out for Pantoja. He's certainly good enough to be ranked, but I just can't push him any further than that, based on the sheer depth of the division. Bantamweight. In contrast to Pantoja, Sterling actually has an interesting body composition for featherweight. I do think that Aljo's skills would translate well, sure. His ability to use his takedowns, to get to the back and to hold it. These would make him a nightmare in certain matchups with the right game plan, especially if he did pack on some muscle. But Aljo is certainly not a big hitter, and I do think that his chin would have a tough time against some of the heavier punchers at featherweight. I don't like him in top 5 matchups against Ilia Topuria or Brian Ortega, and even down the line, guys like Movsar Evloev and Giga Shikadze could be tricky, but in that region of the division is where I believe Aljo would fall, just inside the top 10, with the possibility of moving higher with the right matchups, but also in danger of losing to a rising contender. I believe we will see Sterling at featherweight before too long, and I do hope he makes the move with the right amount of time given to maybe adding a bit more mass to his frame. There are some good matchups for him, and if he is injected directly into the top 5, again with the right matchup, anything can happen. But I'll go with a top 8 pick for now, based on what I think he can do. Featherweight. Alexander Volkanovski is the best fighter in our sport right now, and though I did narrowly score the Islam Makhachev fight against him, I do think he won in terms of the moral victory. And I would pick him to beat Makhachev in a rematch, but it's not a confident pick. Islam is also liable to improve greatly at the second time of asking. But at this stage, I just can't help but be confident in Volkanovski's fight IQ, his physicality, his technical skills, and yeah, I think he just has the tools to be a champion at lightweight, no matter who has the belt. On a quick side note, if you want to help MMA Dive as we make our push for 100,000 subscribers, be sure to let us know your thoughts on the videos in the comments below before hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Lightweight. This is an interesting one. Islam Makhachev has stated that he is in fact intrigued intrigued by the possibility of a move up to the welterweight division to take on whoever holds the belt. Now, will we see that become a reality anytime soon? Well, between the presence of Charles Oliveira and the newly crowned BMF champion Justin Gaethje, as well as that rematch with Alexander Volkanovski that we absolutely have to see, I would imagine he's probably going to stay at lightweight for now. But looking at that upper welterweight tier, there are certainly some tough fights for Makhachev. Like, I do wonder how successful his style of wrestling could be against guys like Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, even if they are getting on in age. The height and length of guys like Leon Edwards and Shavkat Rakhmonov could be tricky. And then there's the BJJ of Gilbert Burns, which when coupled with his physicality could serve up some interesting problems. I think Islam has the ability to beat all of these guys, but I'm not convinced that he wouldn't falter in at least one or two of these top 5 or 6 matchups. I'll say that Makhachev would be comfortably in the top 5, maybe even the top 3 in terms of his ability, but this is definitely a tricky one to really try and predict. Welterweight. Leon Edwards managed to shut quite a few people up when he turned in a career-best performance in his trilogy fight with Kamaru Usman, proving that his own skill set was more than capable of stifling the famously persistent former champion. Edwards' game is all about nuance, and there are several little features to his approach on the feet, in the clinch, and on the mat that add up to one incredibly tricky opponent. And I would argue that his technical skills would serve him quite well as a middleweight. The question I would have is whether he has the firepower to keep guys like Jared Cannonier, Dricus du Plessis, and Marvin Vettori at bay, and in a fight with guys like Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker, where they can match him technically, how much would their advantages in physicality come to the fore, the size advantage? Well, I do think that Edwards beats a lot of guys in the top 15 and top 10 in a way that really puts the middleweight division's shallow upper levels into perspective, but I do think he would run into some issues with the members of the division's top 5, in particular Izzy, Whittaker, and maybe du Plessis. But I do think he's going to make it into that top 7, top 5 kind of range comfortably. There's a pretty big drop off in terms of quality at middleweight, outside of the elite, and I reckon that Leon would be somewhere on that line. Middleweight. This one is quite interesting. If we're to assume that Israel Adesanya moves up to 205 pounds, as he is now, with minimal physical prep or changes, I do think he would do quite well, and I will say that he does look a bit bigger now as a middleweight in comparison to when he originally went up. Jan Blachowicz, in hindsight, was actually kind of a terrible matchup for Izzy, a guy who has the technical striking, a great understanding of leg kicking systems, and a physicality that Stylebender just could not match. But Jan is older now, and though Alex Pereira will take his place in the top 5, I think Blachowicz is right there with Poatan and Magomed Ankalaev as some of Izzy's toughest matchups. Yuri Prochazka is obviously liable to do anything, and the physical leap between middleweight and light heavyweight does make this one a pretty tough one to call. But I think Adesanya in his current state can still do very well and find himself in title contention. Light heavyweight. Obviously we don't have a light heavyweight champion, but I'm gonna go with Yuri Prochazka anyway. It just feels right. And a part of me would love to see what sort of chaos Prochazka could summon if he did move up to heavyweight. And just like his position within my Adesanya prediction, I find the idea of trying to imagine him as a heavyweight very difficult to call. Yuri might just be the hardest fighter to analyze in terms of pre-fight predictions, because you just don't know how far his look will take him. He has the potential to do amazing things, but at heavyweight, his lack of defense and hitability could be an issue, and probably would be an issue. Like, how would you predict a fight between Yuri and, say, Derek Lewis? It's a very strange fight even to say out loud, and there's nothing straightforward about trying to predict it. So I do think that Prochazka could struggle at heavyweight, where the risk factors really require you to manage every step to a much greater extent to avoid getting KO'd stiff. And I don't think that's the type of fighter Yuri is. I'll say that Prochazka makes it into the top 10, just about, but he's the type of guy who could also lose to some unheralded unranked fighter, or rise to the very top of the division and take out the champion. Heavyweight. And finally we come to the heavyweight division, and with that the end of our video. Obviously John Jones has nowhere to go division wise. But yeah, that will do it for this video. So what did you think of our picks? And if you have any quirky content suggestions, do let us know. We're racking our brains here at MMA Dive in our effort to break 100k. Let us know your opinions in the comment section below before liking the video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our uploads. Thank you for watching.